All right, I guess we'll get started. Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, Intelligent Records Management Looking to the Future. We appreciate you all being here, and first I'd like to take a second and introduce myself. My name is Matthew Deeden, and I am the Product Marketing Manager here at Gimmel, and I am joined by our speaker and CEO, David Quackenbush. So before we get started, I would like to go through a few housekeeping items. We are recording today's session, and all of our attendees will be receiving an email of the recording within 24 to 48 hours. Also, if you have any questions, please submit them. We will be having a live Q&A after today's session, and we will answer as many questions as we can get to. And if you have any technical difficulties, please send us a message and let us know so we can help you solve any issues you might be having. So with that, I'm now going to hand it over to our speaker, David Quackenbush.
Great, thank you, Matt. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for taking the time to join us on the webinar today. As Matt said, this is David Quackenbush, CEO of Gimmel, and we have an interesting presentation for you today. This is something that we've been working on at Gimmel for quite a while, and we've been in the business of records management for 17 years, or coming on 17 years of the company. So we've seen the changes and the evolutions, and today we're really here to talk about where we see, possibly see the world of records management going, and as importantly, the function of records management. So you've got really two different things there. You've got the process of people managing content and records in the organization, and you've obviously got the technology side of that. And we see a lot of change coming down the road, on both sides, and we're going to go through what some of our thinking is there as part of this webinar. If you think about our agenda, we'll first take a quick look back, because it's always important to kind of know where you're coming from and get a perspective on how much change has actually already occurred over any period of time relative to this particular topic. Spend a little bit of time in the here and now, and then talk about the next generation, or what we believe is the next generation of records management and how to get there. And like Matt said, if there's time for questions, what questions we can answer, we will do that at the conclusion of the session. So let's jump right in. So let's take a look back first and think about just something that everyone's probably very familiar with on the call, and have participated in at least one or two of these decades, maybe as many as four. I go back all the way into the 80s for sure, so I know maybe others on this call that might as well. And you think about where technology has come since the 80s and the different evolutions, and you see some similarities if we just think about where document and records management has gone from an electronic standpoint. You begin with imaging in the 80s, that morphs into document management in the 90s and becomes this thing called ECM in the 2000 timeframe, and all of a sudden content, web content, and things like that become an important part of the picture. Other kinds of content, video as well. And now here we are in the tens, and you've got a whole variety of new technologies, including cloud computing, that are really starting to change our thinking about what content is and what documents are, and even so much so that Gartner's refashioned the whole thing as content services from their old terminology of enterprise content and records management. So if you think about records for a second, then the history is a little bit longer, dates back to a long time ago with the Sumerians. I guess they're the original fathers of records management, perhaps in some people's minds. But there's been a long history of improvements and changes, and probably the one thing in common is that mankind has always been interested in understanding important elements to life and to business, and making sure those things are preserved for some period of time into the future. It takes us to what we just talked about in terms of where we are in these days with electronic documents and records management solutions and beyond. But again, if you think about it from records perspective, perhaps Moses is the first one we can look to that gives us our beginning of records since he was the first person that actually took tablets and merged it with data in the cloud to start this records management concept. But in all seriousness, you know, what has the cloud done to impact records management? And, you know, now there's more places for records to hide, and there's even more expansion of dark data in the enterprise because we've got all these new places to stick information that weren't available just a few short years ago. So where are we now? Disruption is really the name of the game, and it's an overused term, particularly as it relates to business change and technology change in general. Here's the definition that Webster provides us in green. I changed it a little bit to make it more relevant to our conversation today. And, you know, to me, disruption is something that is happening now right in front of our faces. Each one of us, it's disguised as a variety of different activities that look totally unrelated, and that's why disruption often takes people by surprise, because it's a bunch of things bubbling under the surface. Maybe they're little things. Maybe you can't even spot them one by one, and then all of a sudden they converge, and you end up with this disruptive thing, whatever it is. And I suspect that that's exactly where we are today in the world of records management and records managers, and we're headed towards the next generation. And I'll provide some examples, but I think it'll clarify the fact that what's going on today has actually been happening for a while, and we're just now starting to see with more clarity the convergence of a number of things that are going to be driving the next generation of information management, which will include records management. And you know, when you think about it, what does that look like or sound like? Is it, you know, I got dark data all over the enterprise. I guarantee you, for most people on this call and beyond, with certainty, I doubt there's very many people that could say, I know where 100% of my records are today that are critical for this business that I'm supporting or that my company operates in. You know where the records are that you know about, but is that all of them? Where are the change agents for looking at how to deal with legacy content in general? Because it's probably one of the most overwhelming things that most of us have to deal with. Since the 80s, since the invent of the desktop computer, people have been storing documents in various forms and fashions, most notably shared drives today, but also lots of other systems. And is any of that, how much of that data is actually useful? And is it worth even bringing forward into the next generation of tools and systems that people want to use to manage information on a go-forward basis? And who are the owners of the process for access, classification, capture, and management of content through disposition? Is it just records management? Is it people that are in the business that are called super users, or they're called master data management people, or they're called information managers? Who are they? And really, is it owned by anyone? And, you know, I think one of the challenges that we've all faced in an industry around content and information management is that for most companies, information management is everybody's problem and nobody's responsibility per se. And so then think about things like paper in a cloud-first world. So here we are today with this rapid adoption of what appears to many as new technology, and it's these cloud-based platforms, whether it's Office 365 or your various flavors of Google or AWS or Salesforce or name your poison in the cloud. They're all storing content, but I still have all this paper. And so I've got to manage all this electronic content everywhere, but I still have all this paper. Many of our businesses that we work with are 100-year-old companies, and they have, you know, volumes and volumes and warehouses full of documents and paper. And where does that fit into this whole process, and how do I ultimately deal with all that? Because even in warehouse space, it gets pretty expensive to manage all that and maintain all that. just for the purpose of preservation if there's no real value to those pieces of content. And so then, the other thing that you have to consider now is, once again, and we'll get into this later in the presentation, but what is the asset value of all this information, and when will the organization really start to be as focused on information as an asset like it is its other assets that it maintains and preserves for running its business? And some of the best examples for us are here in Houston, because we're in the epicenter of the oil and gas industry, but you think about all the assets that are deployed in an oil and gas business process, whether it be pump jacks and wells and wellheads or pipeline or storage facilities, processing plants. They're all assets, and they all have to be maintained and managed in order to operate efficiently and to get the most value out of the investments of capital placed upon those assets. And yet here we are today still trying to talk about information as an asset. In most companies, it may be its most valuable asset, and yet very rarely do you see the kind of investment put towards managing that information in the quality of an asset that it really is. So the first thing to think about in our view going forward is, I've got all this information, and the first step I need to really start thinking about is, how do I eliminate my unknowns? Because the unknowns are what gets people in trouble. And there's three classes of unknowns. There's the unknown knowns. There's the known unknowns. So I've got that one in reverse still. I meant to fix that. And then you've got the unknown unknowns. And perhaps the unknown unknowns are the most dangerous, because it's like anything else, you don't know what you don't know, and that's an area of risk that needs to be evaluated quickly and remediated if possible. But ultimately, these each kind of have their own label in corporate America today and in the world. They're silos of information, they're unmanaged repositories, and they're, again, the concept of dark data, this information that exists in the enterprise that nobody knows about. And it takes all kinds of forms. It could be orphan data from employees that have left the company, and they have a bunch of information in a protected share drive that no one has access to except someone in IT, and they just haven't ever gotten around to figuring out how to get it in someone else's pile. And then the Holy Grail, of course, is to have some set of official repositories where all this information lives going forward. And again, we put repositories parenthetically. It's hard to imagine that most companies of scale can ever get down to one repository, and we don't believe that's the case. We believe that most companies will always run a multi-repository strategy for their content. And so the questions are, which ones are the official ones, and how do you drive all this information toward the official repositories so that it can become known, it can be managed properly, it can be evaluated for record quality, but at the same time, it really becomes an aspect of everything, right? And again, this is sort of a clue towards the next generation. It can't just be about records. It's got to be about security. It's got to be about compliance, which can be two different things. And it's got to be about usability. How do people get access to quickly anywhere they want the information they need to do their job? So the next 3 years, really what would be better described as the next generation, in our opinion, looks something like this. First, the thing that's probably the most interesting and will be here before you know it as it relates to content and records management is robotic process automation. I'm sure many of y'all have heard the acronym RPA. It's probably the most prevalent use case today for most companies is in the world of accounts payable and maybe even order to cash, where you've got some fairly predictable business process that can be run over and over and over again by a machine doing all the heavy lifting and leaving the exception processing to human beings reducing all the rote work and really just having the humans focus on the important stuff, which is solving problems. RPA is coming to content and records management. It's a perfect kind of technology to ensure that on the front end of all your business process that you're dealing with content, the content is properly labeled, properly classified across all the taxonomies that one needs. Security, retention, findability, all those things can be done automatically using RPA, such that the end user no longer has to worry about being the person that has to figure that out on the fly when they're creating a document, or whether they're incorporating a new piece of content from a third party or what have you. It can be done behind the scenes automatically and therefore done consistently and within the scope of company compliance and records policy. Another area of great interest for most people on this call are the terms artificial intelligence and machine learning. And how does things like artificial intelligence and machine learning really apply to the world of records management and content management? And if you think about it, look back historically at all this legacy content you have, and you say, well, how am I going to solve this problem? How am I going to eliminate dark data? How am I going to expose all this information in the enterprise in a way that I can start to determine if there's any record quality out there, or if I should just be disposing of a lot of this stuff and getting it out of the way of people that need to use real information? AI could be one of those possibilities. Now, the challenge with AI, of course, is that, A, it requires large data sets, so that's problem number one. You can't apply AI to small data sets and get a lot of bang for the buck, so you still need large volumes of data, which for most companies that applies pretty well in content. Two, though, it needs to be of reasonably good quality, because if it's not, it's garbage in, garbage out. So the way to think about this is that it's like peeling back an onion, perhaps, and that you start to run models that slowly look at this content over a period of time, since it's rarely used anyway, and begin to apply intelligence to it one layer at a time, with the idea being that through a consistent process and through using some of these intelligent tools, you end up with better classified content, smarter content that then somebody can take a look at through various analytics and decide whether or not there's corporate value there to be preserved and managed, or whether some of this stuff can be either deep archived or disposed of completely. And I just went through this, but at the end of the day, it's all, again, about exception management. So if you can clear out the 80% through using repetitive AI processes and machine learning on a lot of this content, you leave yourself with these queues of exceptions that make it much easier for humans to make the final decision on content, as opposed to having to look at all of it, which is quite an overwhelming task. And we've come across this scenario time and time again with clients looking to build a path forward and are somewhat handcuffed by their past because they look at the legacy data, and in some cases this is petabytes of information, and it becomes overwhelming, and just even getting started seems like a challenge. Although we do have some anecdotes that may be helpful in this as we talk about this going forward. So what does the new next generation of records management require? Well, it requires a new way of thinking. I mean, I think the way, again, if you think about disruption, if you think about where information is heading, if you think about the concept of digitization and everything that goes along with that, they all require new forms of thinking. You can't take things you were doing in the 80s or 90s or 2000s and apply them to today. You have to think about things a little bit differently in order to make progress in this digital age. And so what does some of those things look like from a new way of thinking perspective? Well, one thing might be, and this might seem like a radical idea to some on this call, I had a client once that that was the CIO of a very large services business, and we were out talking about things one day, and I was introducing him to somebody or asking him a question about being CIO, and he goes, I don't even know what a CIO does. I'm a CTO. I manage, even though my title says CIO, I don't manage information. I manage technology, and I manage the technology, and I make decisions about technology that I think will be good for the business. But I don't manage the information. The people in the company have to manage the information. I'm just the holder of it and the maintainer of it. So is the next generation of information officer really look like something today that we might call records manager? It's a full-time gig, and right, again, today, if you think about it across the enterprise, it's a lot of people's responsibility in small part to own some part of the information, and maybe that's why this isn't working so well. And it's more than just data science and analytics at the same time. It requires more of an asset management type approach to this asset called information. The current approaches aren't working. As we know, there's more dark data being created every day because people don't know what to do, and so they continue to just create more and more information, classify it sparingly or incorrectly, and store it in all kinds of odd places that many people in the enterprise don't know how to get to. So again, this could be an area where you see the next generation of records manager becomes that information manager that is responsible for knowing where all the information is in the enterprise and making the proper determination as to how classification, records policy, security policy, and other things are applied to that information so that it can be put to its best use and or disposed of at the proper time. So how do we get there? You know, in our perspective, the biggest challenge, again, I mentioned this a second ago, is still all about how do I get started? And usually what hamstrings most of these projects is that people are looking back going, I don't know how I'm going to deal with all this content and whatever else I create. How am I going to get it into this new world order? Because we all know migrations are expensive, painful, time-consuming, and in many cases yield very little value because a lot of the information that you're migrating is rarely used anyway. And I think there's no better example of that than with the vast amount of document stores that exist in the enterprise today and how little that information is used. I mean, just do some basic searches on, you know, show me all the documents that haven't been last used date of greater than 3 years, and you'll easily see the scope of the problem is significant. So maybe instead, the way to get started is to build your day forward model kind of like you're a startup. You know, you need to envision the way you want to do things and the way people want to use information and the places that you want information to be stored, and build that as your conceptual model that you're building to going forward, and create it and start doing day forward business process in the new model. And then looking back, being able to take that content that exists today and having it be more of a systematic approach to how much of this stuff do I take with me versus leave in place and force people that need it to ask for it or to find it through other search tools, but not make it readily available. And I'm certainly not just going to do a lift and shift to get it to the new world order so that I can put more garbage into this bright, shiny new thing that we've just created that people love, only to pollute it with a lot of this legacy data. So I'm not going to go through these, I'm not going to read through each one of these things, but when you think about handling new information, you know, these are some of the questions and the activities you want to go through. That's not an exhaustive list, but really more meant to be an example of how to think about this stuff in terms of when, where, and how information is created. You know, where are the real acceptable locations to store content? What are the minimum classification requirements, and what is, as the life cycle of a piece of content expands, how does metadata get inserted into those different life cycle stages at the right time, so that people aren't burdened with having to apply 15 pieces of metadata to something when it's first being created. What are the exception processes when exceptions arise? Because that's really, again, where most of the challenges are, is in the exception processes, not in the straightforward, here's what I do every day if everything works fine. And what are the disposition processes associated with content in each day of the life cycle? Companies need to be, and most companies are starting to really kind of get the idea that this is important, to constantly be cleaning their environment as they're working every day, as opposed to, waiting 30 years and then going, crap, I don't know how to get rid of all this stuff. I don't even know what's out there. Disposing of the old, again, building new structures, stay forward, not allowing this lift and shift style of migrations. I can't tell you how many times, and people love to sell it because it makes people money to do these giant migrations, and it makes companies money by storing all this content. But lift and shift style migrations are, almost pointless, because now you're not even, in those cases, you're not even doing any due diligence on that information. You're just saying, well, my fastest path is just to pick it up and move it, and I'll deal with it later. And I'm not even going to go into the number of stories I've got relative to talking to clients about this over my career, where they said, and this doesn't even relate to documents, this relates to every single kind of system that you can imagine. And they go, we'll just load the content as it is today and we'll clean it up later. Nobody cleans it up later. It never happens, because everybody gets too busy and work gets in the way. And so the only time to do it is when you have a chance to say, okay, we've got a process that we've got to implement here in the middle to make this right. Putting time limits on all non-record content is easy, low-hanging fruit. And for those on the call, again, be surprised how many companies have finally just said, that's what we're going to do. We're going to say anything that hasn't been touched in the last 3 years is going to be disposed of. We'll send you an email. We'll let you know what we're doing, but we're not playing this game anymore, and it's too hard to go tell us what you need because you're going to tell me you need everything. So we're just going to start enforcing these rules and making it so because it's too hard to do it the other way. And another approach we've seen work very well from a migration perspective of dealing with legacy is that once you've built the new system, there's not a lot of pressure in getting a lot of this information over to the new system right away. And so taking a very systematic department by department approach where you can spend the time in each part of the business going through the content and helping people really discern what's useful and what's not can be a very productive process that takes many years, but it results in a high quality of data being moved into the new world order. So I've talked about this concept a lot, and I want to come back to it real quick in terms of assessing dark data. What is dark data? And there's probably been multiple people that have talked about dark data, but dark data is something that exists in every company, and it's very simple. It is the unknown unknown in the business. If you ask anybody in your company, do you know where all the information in your company lies? The answer is going to be no. And the reason that is because there's a lot of data out there that might be in thumb drives, it might be on hard drives, it might be in unprotected shared drives, unclassified shared drives, it might be in legacy systems that are no longer used, but are still out there because people needed to keep them up and running for the time when they needed it for audit or something like that. Dark data exists in lots of places. And its common theme is that nobody knows what it is, where it is, and there's no real access method to get to it. It takes a search and destroy mission to really understand where it goes. And where it's coming from. Discovery and policy are important in dealing with dark data. You've got to establish, again, if you want to eliminate it, you're going to have to establish day forward rules that prevent the places where dark data lives and eliminate them slowly but surely, because again, for most companies, that's not a simple activity. There are, decades of legacy systems still sitting on many people's IT environments that are just full of this stuff that could create great exposure to the organization. It also requires active change management. When you start to implement these new world policies of where information lives, you can't just beat people over the head with it. You're going to have a more active change management program that explains why it's important, why it's critical that everybody follow the new rules so that it makes it easier for people to know where the good information is and how to use it on a daily basis. I can't tell you the number of times I've talked to people in the E&P industry, for example. You want to talk about a case of dark data, where they will have gone and purchased very expensive seismic data for a particular prospect that they're looking to drill wells on, and then years later, they come back to that prospect to do some more work, and they can't find the seismic that they originally bought, so they go buy it again. And that stuff is, those are very expensive purchases, often millions of dollars spent just because they couldn't find something that they already had. And again, this activity of making dark data, bringing it into the light, isn't a one and done thing. Again, when you think about asset management isn't one and done either. You have to make it evergreen. You have to make it an embedded part of your daily life to stamp this stuff out, because there will always be new technologies, there will always be new things happening that will cause you to want to take a look around and make sure that the organization is complying with the way things need to be done. So again, when you think about doing this going forward, these aren't point-in-time projects. These are exercises. And again, if you think about the next generation of records management, and records managers, it's a business process. You think about the organization today, and one of the biggest challenges for most people that we report or hear from is they can't find what they're looking for, and this concept of data cholesterol. If you think about the human body and the negative effects of bad cholesterol on the human body, it's the same thing. It constrains the blood vessels that lead to a heart attack. And so delayed cholesterol does the same thing in an enterprise. It constrains the natural flow of information in the enterprise because people have to wade through and try to figure out how to get to something to find the good. And all that time and energy creates inefficiency in the enterprise to levels that people write about, but nobody does much time and motion studies on this stuff, but they know that it's real, that there are huge costs to not being able to find information in terms of rework, mistakes, even worse, when you think about plant maintenance and HS&E and things like that, and people working with the wrong information and accidents occur. So it's a big problem, and data cholesterol is a real thing. Again, taking an asset management approach to maintenance like you would to maintenance and operations, you ought to have the same concept for data. There ought to be a maintenance and operations group focused on data. So is that the records management organization? Is that the next generation of information managers? Because again, it's not just about records. I got to have security. I've got to have compliance. I've got to have all these things attached to this information going forward in order to make it more valuable and more usable, and also less risky. And again, it's not a point-in-time activity. It's not, Rome wasn't built in a day. You can't do this in a project. It's a program, and it's a program that has many years associated with it. And if you talk to anybody that's done this before, there are companies that are doing this and that have done it. They talk about the multi-year nature of the program, and they talk about the buy-in that's brought all the way from the top that says this is important because we do believe it's an asset, and we do believe that if we want our people to be productive and enjoy their work, this is an important aspect of being able to do that. So that's all I've got for today. I went pretty fast. I talked about a lot of things. We're excited about where the future's headed. We think that this next generation of records management is a real thing. We believe that the role is changing, that the process is changing, and that the end result for everybody involved is better work, better results, and a more productive enterprise. So with that, I'll stop talking for a little while and take over any questions that y'all might have.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Now, again, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to submit them because we're going to jump into the Q&A portion. You can do so just by clicking the little Q&A button up top. Also, you will see a survey pop up on your screen. If everyone can go ahead and answer those questions, because we will share those results anonymously, of course, at the end, and I think it would be a lot of fun if we could all share those results together. So I do have some questions here for you, David, and I'm going to go ahead and read them in the order they were received. Okay. The first one is, as an information owner, how can we prove the value of records management to leadership?
It's a good question. You know, the tried and true way is not the good way, which is you wait for something bad to happen that's tied to poor use of information, poor record keeping, and use that as your example. That's not really a great way to do things. That's the way most companies end up doing things when it comes to stuff like this. But I think you have to build stories, and I think you have to use metaphors. And a metaphor I used, for instance, in the oil and gas business, I was talking to a CIO and a CFO once in an oil and gas company, and they were like, I don't know why we need to do any of this stuff. It's just a bunch of money. That's the typical response. And I said, yeah. I said, well, it's just like drilling an oil well too. You guys wouldn't go out there and spend $1 million or $10 million or 15 or 100 million on building an oil field and a well, and then just leave it to manage itself. You guys then put a program in place that makes sure you're getting every drop of oil out of that well by properly maintaining the equipment, properly evaluating the subsurface well structure, and doing rework if needed to make it flow better. Why wouldn't you treat your corporate information, which contains as much value, the same way?
Great. The next question being, how can we ensure that our change management process, meaning the new records management process we are implementing, sticks? And is there a path to least resistance?
So I'll address the first question. So change management, it's another thing that's been around for a long time, and I'm sure everybody on this call has talked about it, endlessly through different points of their work life and project life. And the only way that you do that is it has to be an embedded part of the way companies get things done. That people naturally don't change. I mean, even to the point of, the idea that if I just change the screen colors on a system, that causes some people to go haywire and go, wow, my whole system's different. It's like, no, it's not. It's just changed the color from red to blue. Everything else is the same. And so you have to have a model that says every time we implement a change of any kind, or any kind we want to program that we want to do something different, we have to lead it with change management. We have to connect the end user, the person that's being changed, to what's in it for them and why the company thinks it's important to make this change. Both of those things are important, and they have to be ongoing, because just think about all the new people that come and go in an organization and how core organizations reorganize all the time. If you didn't have a persistent change function and people started moving around to different roles, how are you going to continue to get that same group of people up and refreshed on the new change? And some companies, call change management, they call training, their training group change management, but they're really two different things. Training is training. Change management is the activity that ensures that people understand and can connect why the company is doing something to what's in it for the individual and why it's important for them to adopt that change. The second part of the question.
What is the path to least resistance?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the path to least resistance to me is not overcomplicating things, keeping it simple. I think, we, number one, as humans, tend to overcomplicate things that we see as large and overwhelming, because that's, I think, our nature. And the real objective is to keep it simple. And, small wins are better than no wins. And so incremental progress is better than no progress. And so if you, again, break the problem down into manageable chunks where it's easy to move forward. What we see over and over again is trying to do too much too soon. And that kills most of these activities because it is overwhelming. And you can't get people to participate because it still takes manpower. There's not any shortcuts there. You can't automate your way 100% to solving this problem.
Perfect. Next question we have here is, what are the newest out-of-the-box solutions for implementing a records management program? Example, ARMA's RIM's program.
Well, I think there's a lot of things are evolving right now. I'm not sure I could give you any great examples of new programs other than like what ARMA's doing, but what ARMA's doing is a good example. Anybody that attended the latest ARMA conference in Anaheim would note that the conversations and the types of things that are being promoted fit into this category of next generation. So I think there's a lot of things coming down the pike. There's a lot of new technologies being built today, that exist today, that manage records differently than the way they used to be managed in tools like whether it's Iron Mountain's products or Documentum's products or OpenText products or IBM's products or, name 50 other monorepository type of solutions. There are new classes of software coming out there, and this isn't a commercial for Gimel, but obviously we bring that to the table from a federated perspective. There's others like RecordPoint and others that do similar things. So I think, and you're going to continue to see a convergence of a lot of these technologies, because there's also technologies out there that do security classification, and there's also technologies out there that do other things that don't look like records, but actually are another facet of how do I imply compliance? Am I looking at GDPR and what people are doing around GDPR to expose GDPR content so that issues can be mitigated more quickly? And those rules are going to continue to expand. So I think you're going to continue to see these technologies evolve and converge simultaneously to be able to solve these problems. Perfect
answer. Next question is, which team typically owns records management and budget for implementation across systems?
Well, that's a good question. I think what we see most often, the most logical structure today is, legal owns a lot of the records management function, because that still represents sort of the traditional view of records. Records are contracts and things like that are stored in file rooms and file cabinets, and legal are the ones that really are the main users and people that need to understand that content. I don't believe that's the case today, and I think that's a pretty narrow view. And so the other structure we've started to see emerge is the records organization starting to fit into the IT organization somewhere and become part of this broader information management topic that I think some of the more progressive companies and IT organizations are really starting to address, and saying that we have to look at information in its entirety and then ask these questions across all of our information. What is the record quality of this information? What is the security requirements of this information? What are the compliance requirements of this information? What are the need for people to use this information in various forms and fashions?
Perfect. As records managers, what do we need to know information knowledge-wise to take our physical records program to the next level?
Excellent question. The interesting thing about physical records is, and I think forever and a day, everyone says, oh, well, physical records are just fundamentally different than electronic records. And while I think that's really only true in its most obvious definition, I think a lot of the concepts that were used by physical records managers to try to get a handle on managing this information in a way that was easy for people to request ends up being similar in the electronic world. The problem with the electronic world has always been, from the beginning, that people wanted to apply way too much metadata at the upfront, on the onset, to a piece of electronic information, because they were scared to death that they wouldn't be able to find it if they didn't. And we don't believe you need to do that. And furthermore, the two systems ought to be completely aligned. The way you classify a physical document shouldn't be any different than the way you would classify its analogous electronic document. I mean, people are looking for the same kinds of things, and that's why you see a convergence of these systems. If I'm doing a search, why would I want to do a search in 5 systems to find all the things I needed to get my job done? Wouldn't it be a lot easier if I just had a federated search capability where it said, show me all the documents related to platform 47, and here they all showed up, and some of them looked like they were in a box somewhere out in a shelf in a warehouse, and some of them looked like they were in a file room, and some of them looked like they were in Documentum, and some of them looked like they were in Office 365, and I was able to pick and choose from those things all in one common view.
Perfect. All right, we're going to switch gears real quick before we run out of time. Let's take a look at the poll that you guys filled out, and I want to appreciate everyone for taking the time to fill out that survey. Very interesting feedback we got. So you can see on the first one there what pains you're currently experiencing with your records management process. 82% of you answered physical and electronic records are managed separately. I think that's a very common thing that we see today currently, and it's something that we work towards answering. Close second is inability to apply policies across multiple systems. That's something that David, you just talked about a second ago, the federated records management systems. This is a problem that these new records management software systems are currently answering that business pain, right? What content repositories do you currently use? We had 26% ERPs. Documentum is in the lead on that one, followed closely by SharePoint and the rest of the Microsoft stack. And then you've got, which of the following do you think will be most difficult for your organization? 50% of you said saying goodbye to old data. Again, that's another thing that we spoke of in terms of not only dark data, but of, putting that 3-year retention, just getting rid of old data that hasn't been touched is something that we definitely need to think about.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny because, at the end of the day, I think everybody on this call is a human being. And so we all have very similar tendencies. I myself have a 1 terabyte drive at home that has my entire career on it, and it doesn't even work anymore, so I don't even know why I have it, because I don't think I could open it up and even convert the data if I wanted to, but I still hang on to it for some strange reason. And before that, it wasn't too many years ago where I had stacks and stacks of floppy disks, for anybody that remembers those things, or 3.5-inch disks that contain the same. And finally decided I'd be better off putting all that stuff in this hard drive. I've never looked at any of the content, but I'm almost certain I need it, along with the 10 binders of work papers I have on my shelf from prior work I've done, which I haven't referred to in 10 years.
So the last one there is, do you have plans to extend process automations in records management over the next 18 months? 80% of you said yes, and I think 100% of us are going to start to change our processes and update our processes in some way as we continue to evolve this records management industry as a whole. So if there's no more questions, I think we'll conclude our session today. I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar. If you have any more questions, please feel free to contact us on our website. Our direct email, phone numbers on there. Whether it's questions about products, processes, you name it, we'll be glad to help anyone who is looking for it. Once again, we will send this recording to everyone within 24 to 48 hours. And we hope you join us again for our next webinar. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.
Thanks very much.